The massive crystal gates of the galactic Consul building stretched up into the purple sky of Nexus. Prime like frozen lightning. Captain Kim Tae-ho had seen many strange things in his 20 years of space travel, but nothing quite like this. The entire structure seemed to pulse with its own inner light, casting rainbow patterns across the ground where he stood as Black Earth Federation. Uniform felt heavy in the alien gravity. His chest bore the golden eagle symbol that represented all of humanity back on their small blue world. The weight of 5 billion people rested on his shoulders today. Ambassador Park Minesio stood beside him, her diplomatic robes flowing in the strange breeze that always seemed to blow on this artificial planet. She clutched her datapad tightly. Her fingers were white from gripping it so hard. Inside that small device was everything humanity had accomplished in the past 50 years. Every medical breakthrough, every peace treaty, every act of heroism that proved humans deserved to sit with the great civilizations of the galaxy. The alien guards at the gate were unlike anything from Earth. Tall blue-skinned creatures called Valari with 4 arms, each ending in hands that had too many fingers. Their eyes were solid black like pools of oil, and they looked down at the human delegation with obvious disgust. One of them made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could sound like breaking glass. More aliens began to gather around the Crystal Plaza, where the humans waited. Some floated in the air without any visible means of support. Others walked on legs that bent in impossible directions. A few seemed to be made of living metal that shifted and changed as they moved. All of them stared at the humans like they were looking at insects. Kim Tae-ho had fought in 3 different wars. He had seen friends die in the cold vacuum of space. He had faced down enemy battleships that could have turned Earth to dust with a single shot, but standing here surrounded by beings who considered his entire species to be nothing more than clever animals made his stomach twist with nervousness. The crystal gates began to open with a sound like singing. The light from inside was so bright it hurt to look at directly. A figure emerged from the blazing entrance, tall and proud, with skin that seemed to be made of living silver. Council Speaker Veltar was old. Even by alien standards, he had been alive when humans were still living in caves on Earth. His voice carried the weight of authority that came from ruling over 10,000 worlds for longer than human civilization had existed. When he spoke, the very air seemed to vibrate with power. Humans, he said, and the word came out like he was spitting poison. Your species has been watched by our scouts for 50 of your Earth years. You are too young, too violent, too primitive for the Consul. The Consul represents only the most civilized races in the galaxy. Return to your little blue world, and perhaps in another 1,000 years we might consider looking at your request again. Kim Tae-ho felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. We have proven ourselves, Speaker Veltar. We defended 3 colony worlds. From the Void Swarm, we shared our medical advances with 7 different species. We kept peace treaties even when it cost us resources we could not spare them. Gathered aliens began to make sounds that were clearly laughter, though it sounded nothing like human laughter. Some clicked their mandibles, others made whistling noises that rose and fell like wind through metal. A few simply vibrated in a way that made the air shimmer around them. Volta raised one of his silver hands and the laughter stopped immediately. Child play, he said dismissively. Your greatest achievement is barely managing to crawl out of your home atmosphere. The Consul has members who have learned to master time itself, species who can reshape matter with nothing but their thoughts, civilizations that have existed since before your son was born. What could you primitive creatures possibly offer to beings like us? Ambassador Park Minesio stepped forward and activated her datapad. The holographic display showed images of human achievements, hospitals on distant worlds where human doctors worked alongside alien patients, battlefields where human soldiers had died protecting alien civilians, research stations where human scientists shared their discoveries. Freely, we offer something that none of your advanced species seem to possess anymore, she said clearly. We offer the ability to adapt, to survive, to find solutions when all hope seems lost. We offer the one thing that has kept humanity alive through every disaster we have ever faced. We offer the refusal to give up. More aliens had gathered now. The plaza was filled with beings from dozens of different species. Some had wings, others had tentacles. A few seemed to exist as patterns of light that moved through the air. Many of them were so alien that human eyes could barely process what they were seeing. All of them looked at the humans with the same expression of amused superiority. A creature that looked like a walking tree covered in crystals made a sound like wind chimes. These are the beings that think they can sit with the eternal dynasties, it said. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. They have not even learned to travel between dimensions. Another alien, this one resembling a giant floating jellyfish, pulsed with colors that hurt to look at. Their technology is so primitive they still use chemical rockets and metal bullets, it said in a voice like distant thunder. They fight their wars with explosives that barely scratch our defensive shields. Voltar gestured with all 4 of his arms, and the crowd of aliens pressed closer. Guards, escort these primitives back to their vessel. Make sure they understand that this decision is final. Humanity will never have a place among the truly civilized species of the galaxy. The Valari guards moved forward, their black eyes reflecting no emotion at all. Their 4 arms reached out to grab the human delegates, but Kim Tae-ho raised his hand and stepped forward. We came here with respect, he said, his voice carrying across the Crystal Plaza. We followed your protocols. We presented our case according to your laws. We are leaving the same way with our dignity intact, but mark my words, speak of Eltar, and let every being here witness what I say next." The plaza fell silent. The only sound was the strange wind that always blew across Nexus Prime. Even the guards had stopped moving. Humanity will have its seat at the Consul table, Kim continued. "Whether you invite us or not, whether you think we deserve it or not, we will earn our place among the stars, not because you grant it to us, but because we will prove that we belong here." He turned to look at each group of aliens surrounding them, his eyes meeting theirs without flinching. "You think we are primitive, you think we are weak, you think we have nothing to offer, but you have made one mistake in your calculations. You have forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate." The human delegation turned and walked toward their ship, their heads held high. The aliens watched them go, some still laughing, others now silent and thoughtful. None of them understood that they had just made the biggest mistake in the history of the galaxy behind. Then the crystal gates closed with their singing sound. But Kim Taeho's words continued to echo through the plaza long after the humans had gone. The rejection was complete, but something had changed in that moment, something that would soon shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. 3 months had passed since the humiliating rejection at Nexus. Prime Admiral Lee Sung-min stood in the command center of Earth's newest battleship, the Indomitable, staring at the holographic display that showed their position near the edge of human space. The ship was a marvel of human engineering, sleek and deadly, with weapons that could crack a moon in half. But today those weapons felt useless. The emergency transmission had arrived just hours ago, not from any human colony, but from the Galactic Consul itself. The same beings who had dismissed humanity as primitive insects were now sending desperate messages across the galaxy, warning every species to prepare for extinction. Lee read the message again, hoping he had misunderstood something. The ancient enemy known as the Devourers had returned from the dark void between galaxies. These creatures were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. They did not conquer worlds, they consumed them, completely leaving behind nothing but empty space where entire solar systems once existed. Choi Hijin hurried into the command center, her usually perfect hair disheveled from working without sleep for the past 18 hours. As humanity's leading expert on alien biology, she had been trying to understand what they were facing. The data the Consul had shared was terrifying. "Admiral, they're not even asking for our help," she said breathlessly. "They're just warning us to hide and hope these Devourers don't notice Earth. They have given up on defeating them." Lee studied the tactical information humanity had managed to intercept through their spy networks. The Devourers moved across space like a living plague. Their bioships were massive things that seemed to be grown rather than built. Each one was the size of a small moon, and they grew larger with every world they consumed. The Consul's greatest military forces had already tried everything. The Volari, with their quantum weapons that could destroy matter at the atomic level, had fired everything they had at the Devourers. The energy beams passed right through the bioships as if they were made of nothing but shadow. The crystalline Kethver had tried using their reality warping technology to simply delete the Devourers from existence, but their most powerful weapons had no effect at all. The creatures seemed to exist partially outside normal space, in dimensions that even the most advanced species could not reach. Even the ancient preservers, masters of technology so advanced it seemed like magic, had been forced to retreat. They had sealed themselves away in hidden pocket dimensions, leaving their million worlds to be consumed rather than face the Devourers. "Directly show me the battle recordings," Lee commanded. The holographic display filled with images of devastation. The first encounter had been near the Rimworlds, where Consul patrol fleet had discovered 3 Devourer bioships feeding on a dead planet. The patrol had consisted of 12 warships representing the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. The battle had lasted less than 10 minutes. The bioships moved like living things, writhing and twisting through space in ways that defied physics. Energy weapons struck them and simply vanished, as if absorbed into nothingness. Kinetic projectiles passed through them without causing any damage. Antimatter warheads exploded harmlessly against their hulls, but the Devourers' counterattack had been devastating. Tendrils of living darkness had reached out from the bioships, wrapping around the Consul vessels. The advanced shields that could stop the power of a star simply failed. The alien crews had enough time to send one last transmission before their ships were pulled apart and consumed. Since then, the reports had grown worse by the day. Entire star systems were going dark as the Devourers swept through them. The bioships were growing larger and more numerous with each world they devoured. What had started as 3 creatures was now becoming a swarm that covered light years of space. Lieutenant Yoon Soo-bin entered the command center, carrying more data crystals. She was young, barely out of the academy, but her mind was sharp and she had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed. "Admiral, the latest reports show 17 more worlds have gone silent in the past day alone," she said, placing the crystals into the display system. "The Devourers are not just consuming planets, they are consuming the very fabric of space itself. Where they pass, nothing can exist anymore." Lee watched the tactical display update showing the expanding zone of nothingness where the Devourers had been. The creatures were not following any pattern he could understand. They seemed to be moving randomly through space, consuming everything in their path. Choi pulled up biological scans of the creatures themselves. What we are seeing should be impossible, she said, pointing to the swirling masses of dark energy that made up their bodies. They exist partially in our dimension and partially in something else somewhere that our science cannot detect or affect. Implications were terrifying. If the creatures existed outside normal space, then traditional weapons would never work against them, no matter how advanced, no matter how powerful. The weapons would simply pass through them like firing bullets at a ghost spot. Lieutenant Yoon was studying the data with the fresh eyes of someone who had not yet learned what was supposed to be impossible. Admiral, what if that is exactly why we might be able to help, she said quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the young officer who had just suggested that primitive humanity might succeed where the greatest civilizations in the galaxy had failed. Explain, Lee said. Well, sir, we know that the Consul species have technology so advanced it can manipulate reality itself. But what if that advancement is actually the problem? What if their weapons are too sophisticated to affect something that exists between dimensions? Choi caught on immediately. Our weapons are crude by comparison. Simple kinetic projectiles, chemical explosives, nuclear warheads that work entirely in normal space. We do not have the technology to reach into other dimensions, so our weapons cannot be confused by the Devourer's dual existence. The idea was so simple it was almost insulting. The most primitive weapons in the galaxy might be the only ones that could actually hurt these creatures. But as Lee thought about it, the logic became undeniably. Get me a secure communication link to the Consul, he ordered. I think it's time to make Speaker Veltar an offer he cannot refuse. The communication system crackled to life, and soon the familiar silver face of the Consul speaker appeared on the display. He looked haggard and desperate, nothing like the arrogant being who had dismissed humanity just 3 months ago. Admiral Lee, what do you want? He said without any pleasantries. The galaxy is ending and we do not have time for human games. We have a solution, Lee said simply, but first we need to discuss terms. Walter laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You think your primitive weapons can succeed where our most advanced technology has failed? Dr. Choi stepped forward to explain the theory. The Devourers exist between dimensions. Your weapons try to target them across multiple planes of existence and end up hitting nothing. Our weapons are too simple to detect other dimensions. They just hit whatever is directly in front of them in normal space. The silence that followed was deafening. Veltar and his advisors were processing the implications. If the humans were right, then the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had been defeated by their own sophistication. What are your terms? Veltar asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. A permanent seat on the Consul with full membership rights, Lee replied, and a formal apology for your earlier treatment of our delegation. The speaker looked like he wanted to refuse, but behind him alarms were sounding and displays showed more worlds going dark. The Devourers were less than a week away from the core Consul worlds, and if we refuse, he asked, then you can try explaining to the Devourers how your pride was more important than the survival of galactic civilization. Lisa donned a display. They could see Veltar struggling with the decision. Everything he believed about the natural order of the universe was being challenged by a species he had considered beneath notice. Very well, he said finally, we accept your terms. But if you fail, if your primitive weapons prove as useless as logic suggests, then humanity will share the same fate as the rest of us. Lee smiled grimly. That was always going to be true anyway. At least this way we all go down fighting. The communication ended and the command center buzzed with activity. Preparation orders flew out to every human ship and colony. If they were going to save the galaxy, they would need every weapon, every ship, and every human willing to fight. Lieutenant Yoon looked up from her displays. Admiral, incoming reports show the Devourers have changed course. They are heading directly for Earth. Then we fight them here, Lee said. Our home, our rules. Let them come and see what humanity is really capable of. The Consul emergency chamber had never seen such chaos in its 10,000-year history. Representatives from hundreds of different species filled the crystal galleries, their voices creating a symphony of panic that echoed off the curved walls. Speaker Veltar stood at the center of the maelstrom, his 4 silver arms gesturing frantically as he tried to maintain some semblance of order. The holographic display surrounding the chamber showed nothing but bad news. 17 more star systems had gone dark in the past 6 hours. The Devourer bioships were now the size of small moons, and their numbers had grown from 3 to over 50. The expanding zone of nothingness they left behind was visible even from distant galaxies. High Commander Zethral of the Valari battle fleet delivered his report. With barely controlled terror, the Ethkari Grand Armada attempted a final stand at the Nexus gate systems. All 200 ships were consumed in less than an hour. The bioships have grown to the size of actual moons. Now our projections show complete galactic extinction within 6 standard cycles. The chamber erupted in fresh panic. A floating creature that resembled a jellyfish made of pure light pulsed in distress colors, while a crystalline being that looked like a living mountain began to crack along its surface from stress. Even the ancient preservers who had seemed immortal were now talking about permanent retreat to dimensions beyond normal space. Voltor raised his arms for silence, but his voice cracked when he spoke. We have tried everything our greatest minds could devise. Quantum weapons pass through them. Reality manipulation has no effect. Even temporal displacement cannot touch them. They exist in a state that our science cannot comprehend or affect. That was when the main communication array activated without authorization. The massive holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered and suddenly showed a familiar human face. Captain Kim Tae-ho appeared larger than life, his expression calm and almost amused by the chaos he was witnessing. Honored members of the Galactic Consul, Kim said with obvious mock politeness, we could not help but notice that you seem to have developed a rather serious problem, a big planet-eating problem if our intelligence reports are accurate. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Veltar practically shrieked in rage. Humans, this is not the time for your primitive games. The galaxy faces complete extinction, and you dare to mock our suffering? Yes, we dare, Kim replied, his smile never wavering. And yes, you are facing extinction, but we are here to offer our assistance. However, before we discuss how we can help, you need to understand our terms. A chamber filled with alien sounds of outrage, clicking mandibles, whistling air sacs, and the grinding of crystal joints created a cacophony of fury. How dare these upstart primitives make demands during the greatest crisis in galactic history? Da Choi Haij appeared beside Kim on the display, her scientific credentials giving weight to what she was about to say. We have spent the past week analyzing every battle report you have shared with us. Your weapons are failing because they are too advanced, not because they are not powerful enough. Impossible, declared High Scientist Mothkar of the Kethva, his crystalline form sparkling with indignation. Our reality manipulators can reshape matter at the quantum level. How could primitive human technology possibly succeed where we have failed? Da Choi activated her own display, showing detailed analysis of the Devourer bioships. The creatures exist partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions that your weapons are trying to target. Your energy beams scatter across multiple dimensional planes and hit nothing. Your reality warpers cannot affect something that exists between realities. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. But our weapons are too primitive to detect other dimensions. Our nuclear warheads, our kinetic projectiles, our chemical explosives all work entirely in normal, three-dimensional space. They cannot be confused by quantum effects because they do not have the sophistication to detect quantum effects. The implications hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. Their greatest achievement, their technological superiority, was actually the reason they were helpless against this threat. Meanwhile, the species they had dismissed as barely intelligent insects might hold the key to survival. Command on Nifla of the Valari fleet was the first to understand. You were saying that your crude weapons will work because they are crude. Exactly, Kim said. Our missiles do not try to track targets across dimensions, they just fly in a straight line and explode. Our railguns do not attempt quantum targeting, they just fire chunks of metal very fast. Our nuclear weapons do not try to manipulate reality, they just release a lot of energy in normal space. The silence in the chamber was deafening as hundreds of the galaxy's greatest minds processed this information. The most primitive military technology in known space might be their only hope for survival, but there was still the matter of human demands and alien pride. Veltar struggled visibly with what he had to do. The very foundations of Consul hierarchy were crumbling before his eyes. What exactly are your terms? He asked quietly. Kim Tae-ho leaned forward, his expression becoming serious. A permanent seat on the Galactic Consul with full voting rights, complete access to all Consul databases and technology exchanges, and a formal public apology for your previous treatment of humanity. Several aliens began to protest, but Veltar silenced them with a gesture. And if we refuse these terms, then you can attempt to negotiate with the Devourers yourselves, Kim replied. We will take our primitive weapons and return to Earth to make our final stand alone. Da Choi added one more crucial detail. Our analysis shows that the Devourers will reach the core Consul worlds within 4 standard days. Your most advanced civilizations will be consumed first because they are the largest sources of organized energy. The creatures seemed drawn to technological signatures. The mathematical certainty of extinction hung over the chamber like a dark cloud. Every minute they spent debating was a minute closer to the end of everything they had built over millions of years. Valt looked around at his fellow Consul members, seeing fear and desperation in every alien face. The proud civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for eons were reduced to begging for help from the species they had considered worthless. Very well, he said, his voice barely audible. When you accept your terms, humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Consul with all rights and privileges. We formally apologize for our previous dismissal of your species. The words tasted like poison in his mouth, but the alternative was watching everything he had ever known disappear into the void. Kim Tae-ho smiled, but there was no triumph in his expression, only grim determination. Good, now, let us discuss how we are going to save your galaxy. Admiral Lee Songmin appeared on the display beside Kim. We are already mobilizing every human warship and converting civilian vessels for combat, but we will need your ships to provide support and logistics. Our weapons may be able to hurt the Devourers, but we will need your shields and engines to get close enough to use them. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Human military doctrine was shared with alien commanders for the first time in history. Crude human weapons were loaded onto sophisticated alien ships. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were learning how to fight like primitives. As the combined fleet prepared for what might be the final battle in galactic history, one thing had become clear: the old order was ending, whether they Won or lost, the galaxy would never be the same again. The species that everyone had dismissed as too primitive to matter were now leading the fight for survival, and they were about to show the universe what humanity was truly capable of. The combined human-alien fleet stretched across space in a formation that would have been impossible to imagine just days ago. Sleek Consul vessels with their glowing energy shields and reality bending drives flew alongside humanity's crude but deadly warships. The contrast was almost comical, like watching butterflies fly in formation with hammers. Commander Park Jinwoo stood on the bridge of the human flagship Retribution, watching the sensor displays as they approached the Devourer swarm. His ship was not the most advanced vessel in the fleet, but it carried more firepower than any human ship ever built. Nuclear missiles, kinetic railguns, and enough chemical explosives to level a mountain range through the viewport. Space itself seemed wrong where the Devourers were feeding. The bioships writhed and twisted in ways that hurt to look at directly. Their dark forms seemed to bend light around them, creating distortions that made the human crews nauseous. The alien ship's sensors could barely lock onto them. "How many are we facing now?" Commander asked Lieutenant Oh Min-young as she studied the tactical displays. "At least 60 bioships, each the size of a small moon." Park replied grimly, "and they are still growing larger with every well, they consumed." The Consul ships maintained their positions at the edge of weapons range, their crews terrified to get closer to creatures that had consumed entire fleets. Admiral Veltar's voice crackled over the communication system, his usual arrogance replaced by barely controlled fear. "Human ships, we will provide long-range support with our energy shields and defensive systems, but we cannot risk getting too close. Our vessels are too valuable to lose in close combat." Park almost laughed at the absurdity. The most advanced ships in the galaxy were hiding behind humanity's metal cans and chemical rockets, but he understood their fear. Every alien ship that had gotten close to the Devourers had been consumed completely. "All human vessels. This is Admiral Lee Seung-min," came the voice from the fleet command ship. "Prepare for close-range engagement. Remember, these things exist partially outside normal space, so trust your instruments, not your eyes. Target what your computers tell you. Is there not what you think you see?" First wave of Devourers began moving toward them like a tide of living darkness. They moved in ways that defied physics, flowing through space as if it were water. Their bioship hulls pulsed with internal organs that seemed designed for purposes beyond human understanding. The alien ships opened fire first, their advanced energy weapons creating brilliant displays of light that lit up the void. Quantum disruptors that could unmake matter at the subatomic level struck the bioships and simply vanished. Reality manipulation beams that could reshape space itself passed through the creatures without any effect. It was like watching children throw soap bubbles at a hurricane. Then the human ships charged forward. Captain Oh Sang-hoon led the first attack wing in his modified destroyer Vengeance. The ship was an ugly, brutal thing compared to the alien vessels, but every weapon mount bristled with death. "All weapons fire at will," he commanded over the tactical network. The effect was immediate and shocking. Nuclear warheads that had been considered obsolete by galactic standards tore through the Devourer bioholes like paper. The creatures writhed in what could only be described as agony. As primitive human explosives ripped apart their living ships, chemical rockets that any first-year engineering student could build carved deep wounds in flesh that had seemed invulnerable moments before impossible. Gasped Commander Nathala of the Valari fleet, her forearms trembling as she watched her sensors. "How are your primitive weapons cutting through defenses that stopped our quantum disruptor store?" Choi Hyjin voice came over the communication channel from her research vessel. "We told you that it exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your weapons try to target them across all those dimensions and hit nothing. Our weapons are too simple to even detect other dimensions. They just hit whatever is directly in front of them in normal space." Human fleets spread out in attack formations that had been perfected in countless wars against other humans. Fast destroyers darted between the massive bioships, firing kinetic rounds that punched through alien flesh. Heavy cruisers unleashed volleys of nuclear missiles that bloomed like deadly flowers across the Devourer formations. But the creatures were learning and adapting. Tendrils of living darkness reached out from the bioships, trying to grab the human vessels. Several destroyers were caught and began to be pulled toward gaping maws that opened in the creatures' hulls. But the human ships were ready for this emergency. Separation protocols were activated and ships broke free using explosive bolts that severed the grabbed sections. The humans had learned long ago that sometimes you had to cut off a limb to save the body. Captain Lee Hyrin commanded a squadron of converted cargo ships that had been loaded with every explosive device they could carry. Her voice was calm as she gave the order that would make her famous throughout the galaxy. "All ships ramming speed, target the largest bioship. We are going to show these things what humans do when we get angry." The cargo ships accelerated toward a Devourer bioship that was nearly the size of a moon. Their hulls were packed with nuclear warheads, chemical explosives, and kinetic penetrators. The alien crews watching could not believe what they were seeing. The humans were planning to ram creatures that had consumed entire fleets. The impact was spectacular. The cargo ships struck the bioship like bullets hitting flesh. The explosions that followed lit up space for light years in every direction. The massive Devourer creature convulsed and began to break apart. sections of its biohull floating away as it died in the vacuum of space, but Captain Lee, Hiron and her crews were gone, consumed in the explosion that killed their target. This is Admiral Lee, all ships. The human fleet commander voice was tight. With emotion, we honor our fallen by finishing what they started. All vessels target the wounded bioships and finish them off. The battle became a slaughter, but not in the way anyone had expected. The Devourers, who had seemed invincible against advanced alien technology, were being systematically destroyed by primitive human weapons. Nuclear fire carved through biohulls, kinetic rounds punched holes in creatures the size of cities, chemical explosives tore apart flesh that had consumed planets. The surviving Devourers began to retreat. Commander Park Jin-woo was not about to let them escape. All ships pursue and destroy. We end this threat here and now. No mercy for things that eat worlds. The human fleet chased the fleeing Devourers across 3 star systems, methodically hunting down every bioship. Some tried to hide in asteroid fields only to be blown apart by human demolition charges. Others attempted to escape into hyperspace, but human ships followed them. Even they're using technology borrowed from their new alien allies. The galaxy's greatest threat in 10,000 years was being eliminated by the species everyone had considered too primitive to matter. As the last Devourer bioship exploded under a barrage of human missiles, Admiral Lee Sung-min opened a communication channel to the Consul fleet speaker. Veltar, the threat has been eliminated. The Devourers are destroyed. The silence that followed lasted for nearly a full minute. How? Veltar finally asked, his voice filled with wonder. How did you accomplish what our greatest civilizations could not? We are human. Lee replied simply, we do not give up, we do not surrender, and we do not let anyone threaten our friends. The word friends hung in space between them, loaded with new meaning. The species that had been rejected and dismissed had just saved everyone. The primitive humans had succeeded. Where the most advanced civilizations had failed in the galaxy would never be the same again. The Consul chamber had never seen anything like this in its 10,000-year history. The great crystal hall that had once echoed with the arrogant voices of advanced civilizations now buzzed with nervous whispers as representatives from hundreds of species waited to see what humanity would demand. Captain Kim Tae-ho walked through the massive doors with the confidence of someone who had just saved the galaxy. His simple human uniform looked plain next to the elaborate robes and biomechanical enhancements of the alien delegates, but every eye in the chamber followed his movement. Admiral Lee Sung-min walked beside him, carrying the ceremonial documents that would make humanity full members of the most exclusive club in the universe. The contrast was striking. 6 months ago, these same beings had dismissed humans as primitive insects unworthy of even basic recognition. Now they waited in silence to hear what the saviors of civilization had to say. Speaker Veltar stood at the center of the chamber, looking like he had aged 1,000 years in the past week. His silver skin had lost its metallic shine, and his forearms trembled slightly as he raised them for attention. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of its former arrogance. Galactic Consul formally recognizes the species known as humanity as full members with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities, he announced. The words seemed to stick in his throat. We also offer our formal apology for our previous dismissal of your species and our failure to recognize your true capabilities. The chamber filled with the alien equivalent of applause. Though much of it sounded forced, the proud civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years were essentially admitting that they had been wrong about everything. Ambassador Park Minetskyo stepped forward to accept the formal recognition, but her next words surprised everyone. We accept both the membership and the apology, she said clearly. However, we believe that this crisis has revealed fundamental problems with how the Consul operates, and we propose significant changes to the structure of galactic governance. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembled delegates. What did the humans want now? They had saved the galaxy, earned their membership, and received their apology. What more could they possibly demand? For too long, this Consul has valued only technological advancement and species age as measures of worth. Park continued. You have created a hierarchy based on how sophisticated a civilization appears to be rather than what they can actually contribute to galactic society. Choi Hai-jin activated a holographic display that showed statistics spanning the past 1,000 years of Consul history. The data was damning and undeniable. In the past millennium, how many existential threats has this Consul successfully eliminated through advanced technology? How many major problems have been solved by your most sophisticated members? The answer hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Almost none. The Consul had become a debating society for ancient species who had forgotten how to solve real problems. They had grown so advanced that they had lost the ability to adapt, to think practically, to do whatever was necessary for survival. The Devourer crisis was not the first time you have failed. Dr. Choi continued. The void plague of 3 centuries ago was only stopped when it burned itself out. The temporal fractures that threatened to unravel causality was sealed by accident, not design. Even the great silence that cut off communication between galaxy arms was resolved by natural cosmic phenomena, not Consul action. The assembled aliens shifted uncomfortably as their failures were laid bare before them. Species that had considered themselves the pinnacle of evolution were being lectured by beings they had thought were barely above animals. We propose a new model, Admiral Lee announced. Every advanced species must partner with a developing civilization. The advanced members provide resources, knowledge and technology. The developing members provide fresh perspectives, practical solutions, and the willingness to try approaches that conventional wisdom says are impossible. Chamber erupted in debate, but the outcome was already decided. Humanity had earned the right to reshape galactic society through their actions. The old ways had nearly led to universal extinction, while the new approach had just saved everyone. Scientist Mothkar of the Kethvar raised his crystalline form to speak. You suggest that we should elevate primitive species to positions of authority based on potential rather than proven capability. This goes against millions of years of established protocol. And how well did your established protocols work against the Devourers? Captain Kim asked pointedly. Your million-year-old wisdom nearly got everyone killed. Our 6-month-old solution saved the galaxy. Perhaps it's time to admit that new does not always mean worse. Over the following months, the changes began slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Human advisors were paired with ancient species, bringing new ideas to problems that had seemed unsolvable for centuries. Young civilizations that had been ignored or dismissed were suddenly welcomed into the Consul with full voting rights. The rigid hierarchy that had defined galactic politics for eons began to crumble. Species were judged by their contributions rather than their age, by their solutions rather than their sophistication. The Consul chamber that had once been dominated by the voices of the oldest civilizations now echoed with ideas from beings who had barely learned to travel between stars. Captain Kim Tae-ho stood in his new office in the Consul building, looking out at the diverse fleet that now patrolled the galaxy. Human ships flew alongside vessels from dozens of different species, each contributing their unique strengths to the common defense. The sight would have been impossible just a year ago. Lieutenant Yoon Subin entered carrying a datapad filled with the latest reports. Sir, we are receiving first contact signals from the Andromeda Galaxy. 3 different species are asking for help with what appears to be their own version of the Devourer threat. Kim smiled as he reviewed the information. It seems that our particular approach to problem solving is needed elsewhere in the universe. Prep the fleet and contact our Consul partners. We have work to do. But Sir, Yoon continued, the Andromeda species are asking specifically for human assistance. They say they have heard stories about how we defeated an impossible enemy, and they want to learn our methods. The irony was not lost on Kim. The species that everyone had dismissed as too primitive was now being sought out across intergalactic distances for their expertise in Sabato. Send a message to the Andromeda contacts, he ordered. Tell them that humanity accepts their request for assistance, but make sure they understand that we do not work alone anymore. We are part of something larger. An alpha response went out across the void between galaxies, carrying with it the promise that help was coming. The young species that had been rejected for being too primitive was now leading a coalition of civilizations in missions of rescue and defense. Dr. Choi appeared on his office display with an update from the research division. Admiral, we have been analyzing the quantum signatures left behind by the Devourers. It appears they were not a natural phenomenon. Someone or something created them as weapons. The implications sent a chill down Kim's spine. If the Devourers had been artificially created, then somewhere in the universe was a species or entity with the power to craft planet-eating monsters as tools of war. Then we had better make sure we are ready for whatever comes next, Kim said. Contact all Consul members and tell them we need to accelerate the integration program. If there are more threats like the Devourers out there, we will need every species working together to survive us. The message spread across the galaxy. The new order continued to take shape. Humanity had not just earned a seat at the table. They had fundamentally changed what the table represented. The Galactic Consul was no longer an exclusive club for ancient civilizations. It was becoming a true alliance where every species had value, and at the center of it all were the humans, the primitive species that had refused to accept their limitations and had shown the galaxy what was possible when someone refused to give up. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but for the first time in millions of years, the civilized species, they faced those dangers united with the knowledge that sometimes the most important solutions came from the most unexpected sources. The age of human influence in galactic affairs had begun, and the cosmos would never be the same.